Hi there, my little boss. Imagine a room that smells of leather, smoke, and orange peel. A woman lifts a silver pomander to her nose while a maid tugs fresh linen over her shoulders. In the corner, a bowl of chalky tooth powder, a comb slick with oil, a lidded pot that everyone pretends not to see. We call it disgusting. They called it tidy, respectable, even medicinal. Tonight, we're not chasing shock value. We're going to decode it. What counted as clean when hot water was a luxury, when doctors feared damp air, when perfume was armor and laundry was public theatre? Across this episode, we'll sort satire from sources and find the real routines behind the memes. Lead makeup that looked like virtue but behaved like poison. Soapless baths, where linen did the scrubbing. Scented gloves, not to seduce but to survive the stench of work and animals. Hair dressed with fats and powders to fight lice and advertise status. Teeth scoured with grit in an age when sugar meant celebration and decay. Menstruation managed with belts, cloth, and silence. Water approached like a drug, rare, powerful, prescribed. The household systems that made it all possible. Laundresses, boiling coppers, chamber pots, and the quiet labor of women who kept everyone else clean. By the end, you'll be able to look at a portrait, a recipe, or a laundry list, and read it like a map. What smelled, what hurt, what helped, and why the word gross says more about us than about them. Let's start where the rumors begin, with the myths that stuck. Before we dive in, tap like, subscribe if you're new, and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I love seeing where this little time machine reaches. Chapter 1. Dirty Myths About Women. Satire, Sources, and What Sticks. If you want to make a woman look foolish across the centuries, give her a mirror, a bottle, and a punchline. Satirists have been doing it since quills first found bad moods. The vain lady with powder on her nose. The courtesan whose bath is just perfume. The housewife who hides a chamber pot behind the arras and calls it hygiene. From Roman verse to early modern pamphlets to Victorian cartoons, the formula barely changes. First, decide that women are the problem. Second, decide that smells prove it. Third, arrange your prose so the reader can smirk without ever needing to check a ledger, a laundry list, or a physician's note. The trouble with myths about disgusting women's hygiene is not that they came out of nowhere. It's that they came out of somewhere very specific: satire, sermon, and social anxiety. City life in almost any century was a nose-forward experience. Tanneries, fish markets, soot, animals, night soil wagons, and the human brain, unsure where to park its discomfort, often chose a target wearing a skirt. If a neighborhood stank, it was the alewife's wart, the midwife's herbs, the laundress's coppers. If a court reeked, it was the queen's pomanders, the ladies' wigs, the foreign court fashions with their oils and powders. You will notice the pattern. Men own breweries and tanneries. Women, in the jokes, own the smell. Now let's cheat and do what pamphleteers discouraged. Look at sources that are not trying to be funny. Household books do not do punchlines. They do logistics. They tell you to change linen often, to air bedding, to steep herbs in wine, to warm water on certain days and avoid it on others. They talk about tooth powders, combs, rinses, menstrual cloths, the cleaning of combs and pins, the maintenance of chamber pots, the boiling of nappies, the scalding of cups. Depositions and court ordinances don't smirk either. They fine people for tossing slops out windows, regulate bathhouses, license perfumers, and assign laundresses to hospitals. Portraits are quiet, but loud with evidence. Lace at the neck because skin touches linen constantly. A pomander chain because bad air was thought dangerous. A hairline chalked pale not only for beauty, but to signal rank. If you pair the jokes with the logistics, you get a sobering picture. Most people were trying, with the ideas they had, to be clean. So why do the myths stick? Because they are good stories that flatter modern noses. The women didn't bathe chestnut is efficient storytelling. You can compress centuries into a jeer. They were filthy. We are not. Roll credits. It ignores the entire regime of what contemporaries called dry cleanliness. Linen that wicked oil away, powders that absorbed it, rubbing with cloths, washing of hands and face, partial baths, steam in winter, river swims in summer, scented waters used sparingly because fuel and time were expensive. It ignores class. Water is heavier if you have to carry it. Heat is pricier if you chop the wood. And a maid's back is cheaper than a lord's bathtub. And it ignores medicine. If your doctor believes damp air causes disease, then too frequent immersion is not a spa day. It is a health risk. You can disagree with their science now, but they were not defying hygiene out of indifference. They were obeying it as they understood it. Satire weaponizes the gap between our expectations and their practice. Consider the stock character of the fragrant lady floating down a gallery with her perfume gloves. The cartoon says, lazy, decadent, masking filth. The account book says, citrus blossoms, myrtle, ambergris, musk. Deodorants for leather gloves in a world where tanning involved urine, dung, and months of curing. One text mocks, the other tells you a truth about industrial smell. Or take the powdered scarecrow with a tower of hair and a nation of lice. The joke spreads because it's tidy. Hair plus powder ills bugs. The evidence is messier. Oils to immobilize knits, knit combs in dressing boxes, barbers specializing in shaving heads beneath wigs, regular maintenance, tedious, yes. Apocalyptic, no. Satire keeps the vermin and drops the combs. If the myths have a favorite tool beyond exaggeration, it's moral geometry. Draw a line from women's bodies to social disorder. Medieval and early modern moralists fretted about public baths not because they disliked washing, but because they disliked mixed spaces where sex might happen. Later reformers framed cosmetics as deceit, the linen chest as vanity, scent as seduction. In each case, a practical object, soap, powder, perfume, cloth, acquired a moral shadow. Women became the surface on which society wrote its anxieties about class mobility, sex, and foreigners. Perfume was suspicious because it could hide origins. Powder was suspicious because it could fabricate status. Linen was suspicious because working-class women touched it, washed it, and thereby held power over the cleanliness of their betters. Nothing threatens a hierarchy like the person who controls the laundry. And then there's national insult, always a reliable engine for myth. The French mocked English coldness and dirty beef eaters. The English mocked French perfumes as filthy disguises. Everyone mocked someone else's women as either prudish and unwashed or perfumed and rotten. Add xenophobia to misogyny, and you get the perfect clickbait for a 17th century reader. Foreign ladies reeking of musk, local wives stinking of ale. Pick your sneer. The smell of the other is a story civilizations keep telling to feel tidy at home. What about the science-flavored myths, the ones that point at lead makeup and say, see, disgusting and deadly? Here the satire barely needs to work, because the shock lands on its own. Yes, certain cosmetics contain lead compounds. Yes, lead is toxic. Yes, some women use them. But the conclusion that women were hysterically painting themselves to death while refusing to wash reads more like a cartoon than a ledger. Think instead of incentives. Pale skin telegraphed status, indoor life. Uniform color hid scars or pox, and the finish that lead-based Serus gave on portraits and under candlelight. Read as authority. Toxic? Often. Irrational. Not within their scoreboard of signs. In a world where your face is policy, clean might mean white, matte, poreless, even if the jar bites back. The same sources that record Carus also record rosewater, vinegar washes, almond oil. Routine small-scale washing you never see in the meme because "woman did reasonable thing" is not a viral sentence. There is also the quiet labor that myths erase. Laundresses boiled linen in huge coppers, beat cloth at the river, hauled baskets that could ruin a spine by 40. They kept the dry bath system alive. Midwives and nurses changed pads and swaddles, scrubbed blood and milk out of fabric, disinfected with wine or vinegar when that was the best on offer. Maids chambered pots, then scoured them with ash and lye. If we are going to be disgusted, we might at least distribute the disgust fairly. The infrastructure of cleanliness was overwhelmingly carried by women, and the joke that calls them filthy tends to be written by people who never lifted a copper lid. It's worth asking why our age loves these myths. Partly, it's an algorithm problem. The internet rewards the sharp, simple claim. Queens didn't bathe fits a thumbnail. Queens bathe differently within a miasma framework, while outsourcing much of the wet labor to servants and relying on linen as a daily cleansing technology does not. Partly, it's projection. We distrust makeup ads, diet culture, wellness fads. We war with our own bathrooms. It feels righteous to fling the mess backward and declare progress. The past becomes our compost bin for modern guilt. A pinch of satire helps the medicine go down. So let's build a gallery of the usual suspects and label them honestly. Exhibit A, the Queen Who Never Bathed. Notes: owns a private bath used for convalescence, washes hands and face daily, changes linen often, has opinions about rosewater. Exhibit B, the courtesan of 1,000 perfumes. Notes: can identify a tannery blindfolded. Perfumes gloves, because otherwise they smell like a barn. Sometimes overshoots and enters a room like a citrus orchard with secrets. Exhibit C, the country wife and the comb. Notes: maintains hair with oils because soap alone will crack the scalp. Keeps a knit comb and uses it. Has one bad month every time a neighbor's children bring home lice from a crowded church. Is this disgusting? Not by the standards of anyone who has washed a child at midnight. The stickiest myths are the ones that do not require you to imagine work. Work is heavy, timed, skilled, and gendered. Myth is weightless. Work says, water must be drawn, fuel must be cut, cloth must be clipped, scoured, rinsed, wrung, dried, beaten, ironed, mended. Myth says, you. Work admits trade-offs. If you live in a cold house, you will not take a full-body bath every day, but you might wash in sections twice, change linen, and comb thoroughly. Myth demands absolutes, dirty or clean, saint or swine. Work puts people in rooms together, laundresses gossiping, maids yawning over kettles, a lady bargaining with a perfumer, while myth isolates a woman in a mirror, alone with her powder and her sins. The distance between those images is where historical attention should live. So how do we read smarter? We keep satire in the frame, but deny it the last word. If a pamphlet mocks a lady's mask of paint, we ask what the apothecary sold, what the physician advised, what the portrait displays. If a sermon scolds baths, we ask which baths, public mixed ones, morally suspect, therapeutic tubs in hospitals encouraged, or private tubs on doctors' orders. If a traveller sneers at stinking wives, we check the industries of the town, brewing, dyeing, tanning, fish. We check the wind direction. We check whether he liked the food. We triangulate, and the human being, annoying, admirable, complicated, reappears. Let's keep one more lens handy: power. Much of what gets called disgusting on women is simply the visible edge of power they wielded or threatened to. The laundress touched what touched you. The midwife managed the most intimate hygiene event in a household. The perfume seller dictated how a room remembered you. The lady at court arranged the symbols that told the king and ambassadors who she was. Wherever women had leverage, through cloth, scent, care, or display, someone wrote a smell joke and called it truth. The smell joke survived because it made subordinates look ridiculous and the past look barbaric. If the joke still flatters us, we repeat it. We won't be doing that. We'll keep our sense of humour. The past is not a fragile exhibit, but we'll let the ledgers and the linen speak. And speaking of jars that tell on us, it's time to open the most infamous one. The white face in the portrait, smooth as porcelain, untroubled by pores, is not just beauty. It is policy, rank, and a recipe with a warning label. Our next stop is the dressing table, where clean meant pale, and where the jar sometimes bit back. Chapter 2, Beauty, by Poison. Lead-painted faces and the price of clean. The dressing table is a small laboratory, and the experiment is the face. On its surface sit jars and shells and tiny spoons, a conch of rosewater, a lump of chalk, a pestle sticky with oil. The mirror is metal or dim glass, good at telling lies by candlelight. A hand hovers, and the first principle of the operation is simple. Clean is a finish, not a smell, not even a bath, though water will appear in cautious sips, but a surface you can read from across a room. Pale, matte, uniform. In courts where sun-brown meant fieldwork and freckles meant exposure, the cleanest face is the one that looks least like it ever had to go outside. Ceruse, lead white, was the star ingredient of that finish for a very long time. You can almost hear a perfumer apothecary make the pitch. Snow, but warmer. Porcelain, but human. It covers pock scars, evens capillaries, and holds under heat. He does not say it bites. He does not need to. The jar sells itself. Lead carbonate is generous to painters and ruthless to bodies. It gives light a chalk path, letting skin look poreless under beeswax tapers, and in doing so, it invites a metal into the bloodstream that will not leave politely. But we are getting ahead of ourselves, jumping to the end of the story in a modern tone. Diagnosis before description. If you want to understand why women reached for the jar, you have to stand in their room and count incentives. First, reputation. A lady at court is not just a person. She is policy with earrings. Her skin broadcasts a message to ambassadors, rivals, and her own monarch about health, self-command, and access. The bared forehead and high hairlines of some periods, plucked into neat arches, turn faces into little signboards of rank. Under that geometry, a blotch is not a blotch. It is an argument you are losing. Smallpox scars are a memory the court is not obliged to keep. Keris writes over it. The myth says, vanity. The ledger says, risk management. Second, light. Dress a room in gilding, hang velvet that eats the sun, light it at dusk, then watch what day skin becomes. Reds turn brownish, blotches amplify, pores draft tiny shadows. Painters learn to rustle the whites on a face just enough to hold contour against that gloom. Women learn to do the same in 3 dimensions. The very property that makes lead white beloved on canvas, its covering power, makes it triumphant on cheeks. No other white of the period behaved with such obedient opacity. Chalk sits, powder drifts, lead stays. Third, medicine. To people who believed in humours, hot cold, wet dry as forces in the body, cosmetics were not pure pretense, but part of balancing acts. A cooling white, a drying powder, a closing wash. The language of paint and the language of therapy overlapped. Physicians prescribed vinegar waters, rose distillates, almond emollients. The jar on the table could be a cousin to the jar on the physics shelf. A woman reaching for white could tell herself she was defending her health as well as her position. She was not wholly wrong. She was not wholly right. History rarely gives that gift. So the routine begins. Oil first, sometimes. Sweet almond, expressed with patient labor. Massaged into cheeks to soften flakes. Then a wash, but wash here could mean bread rolled into a soft eraser and dabbed along the jaw. Could mean goat's milk and rosewater, not lather and splash. Could mean a cloth dipped in tepid water and wrung so tightly it barely kisses the skin. Soap exists, yes, but the good stuff, white, hard, fine. Costs. The common stuff stings. And everyone fears what too much wet might open in the pores. Better to pad and pat, then seal what you've made clean. Enter the white. Recipes vary like gossip. Some call for dissolving lead flakes in vinegar, then exposing the mixture to horse dung warmth to flour. Others skip steps, trusting the apothecary to do the alchemy and provide ready-made paste. Some households use bismuth white when they can find it, less toxic, still risky. Others, a chalk base enriched with starch for a poorer but safer veil. The expensive versions sometimes cut their poison with kindness. Drops of oil of bitter almond for scent, a bit of spermaceti or beeswax to help it spread, a whisper of camphor to cool. A fingertip dots temples, cheeks, chin, forehead. Then a hare's foot brush smooths it. Look, the room says, how clean she is. A small correction follows. The mouth and eyes need colour, or the face slides into death. Beet juice, cochineal when empire brings it. A lip pomatum made of tallow and alkanet. Reds that reassure the viewer this is blooded life and not a funerary mask. Patches, mooches, take their position next. Not just fashion, but tactics. Place one near a pockmark and the contrast flatters the rest. Place another to signal or tease according to a code gossip claim to read. Powder may follow to set the scene. Rice, orbits of ground orris root. The room briefly a snow globe. To modern eyes it reads as theatre. To theirs it reads as order. Now for the price. Lead does not politely sit at the surface. It insinuates. Over weeks and months and years, it saps. The early warnings are cosmetic, which is cruel. Irritation, then scaling. The very roughness one wanted to conceal grows under the concealer. Cracks appear if the paste is too thick. Lines if the face dares to move too much. Swelling if it angers the skin. Women answer with more oil at night, whiter by day. Then the deeper harms, headaches, aches in the joints, a fatigue that has no gossip to explain it. In more severe exposures, palsy of hands, a tremor, miscarriages. Not every user pays this price. Not every symptom makes it to a page. But enough do that physicians begin to mutter about cosmetic disorders centuries before anyone builds a periodic table. The moralists, of course, seize on the collateral as proof of sin. See, they say, in sermons and pamphlets, God hates deceit. He has arranged for your face to fall in strips when you pursue it. This saves them the work of talking about class. Because paint is not evenly distributed, it clusters where visibility matters most, which is why the critique is not only about women, but about a tiny fraction of women, courtiers, actresses, ambitious merchants' wives, who operate under a bright lantern of attention. The farm wife keeps her son and her freckles, washes with soft water when she can heat it, powders with starch when she must. The court lady submits to the jar because the room expects a porcelain queen. Disgust, directed broadly at women, lets everybody look principled and nobody look at the economy of gaze. And still, even at the apex of Leeds reign, you find small resistances and smarter routines hiding in plain sight. Cold creams, galenic cerates of oil and wax, become a night ritual not just for softness, but as solvent, coaxing white away gently so the morning's face will accept a lighter coat. Almond paste and bread leave the skin less raw than lye. Some women choose safer whites when they can afford the luxury of slightly worse performance. Others retreat to half masks of colour, just the under eye and upper cheek, a trick of light, rather than full war paint. There is always a quiet, practical countercurrent under any vogue. What did the face feel like? This matters because disgusting in our mouths often means I can feel it, a tactile empathy we apply without permission. The answer is heavier than you think, lighter than a meme. Good white, well thinned, is a film. Badly made white is a paste. The wearer knows it is there. The viewer knows only that the person across the room looks composed in an age that reads composure as virtue. The cost is heat, pores sealed under ceremony, a nervousness about rain, a fear of sleeve smudge on a lover's doublet. Women learn amongst discipline of not touching their own face. There is its own theatre in that restraint. If you want a sharper contrast between satire and sauce, step sideways to the objects that congregate around the white and watch how they complicate the cartoon. Patchboxes are small art. Enamels with cupid jokes, lids that double as mirrors, compartments for tiny scissors and glue. They are playful, yes, but they are also workmanlike kits for managing a hostile world's idea of your face. Scented waters that follow, orange blossom, rosemary, marjoram, are not only for seduction, they are for undoing the smell of tallow and the stale breath of crowded rooms. Paint and wash are not enemies. They are on speaking terms, negotiating a truce each morning. And men? Their faces are not innocent of artifice. Barbers shave, blacken beards, dress perukes, actors paint, courtiers powder. The scandal clings to women because women are the customary stage for moral theatre. It helps to remember this when a primary source sniffs. Often the sniff is not about chemistry. It is about who is permitted to be artificial in public. There is a thin line between clean and pure, and it is as much theology as laundry. A matte, uniform face reads as inward order. A ruddy, uneven one reads as appetite. That is the trick Lead performs in rooms that believe in visible virtue. It takes the weather and gossip off your skin and leaves an emblem. In such rooms, to go without is not authenticity, it is a risk. You can hear the double bind creak. Be natural, but also be perfect. When the jar is a technology that promises to resolve the contradiction, condemnation becomes a luxury of people whose faces are not being judged for their families' fortunes. We, who know about lead and blood and bone, want to shout back in time, don't. But our age keeps its own jars. We take pills that bite to meet a standard set by the room. We install filters. We burn our hours on surfaces. The smarter lesson is not, they were foolish. It is the scoreboard was different and the penalty box was real. By evening, the mask must come off. Not every day. There are nights when ceremony slides into sleep and white transfers to linen like a confession. But most days. Oil, again, does the heavy lifting, bread and milk the coaxing, rosewater the truce. The face underneath is a little redder for the rubbing, a little tender. It breathes. The linen that catches the residue will go to the copper. The maid who scrubs it will carry the cost on her back. The household's idea of clean will be laundered, literally, by someone you will not see in portraits. Which is a good place to pivot, because the next chapter is not about paint at all. It is about what a body can do every day without a bathtub. The jar sits, the linen moves. And linen, more than ceruse, is the daily technology of historical cleanliness. Chapter 3. Soapless Baths. How Linen and Powder Replaced Water. Morning begins with cloth. Not water, cloth. A maid shakes out a clean shift, the sound like a bird's wing in a quiet room, and the woman steps into it as into a habit. The fabric is fine if she's wealthy, coarse if she isn't, but the logic is the same across rank. Linen is the day's first bath. It kisses oil from skin, lifts last night's sheen, and puts a mat on the body the way lead put a mat on the face. If Chapter 2 was the laboratory of jars, this is the factory of thread, less glamorous, more decisive. Dry cleanliness sounds like a paradox until you live in a house where water has to be fetched, fire has to be fed, and doctors warn that a hot soak opens the gates to illness. In that arithmetic, the body's relationship with water becomes cautious, strategic. Hands and face get the lion's share. Basin, ewer, a cloth wrung so tight it almost squeaks, while the rest of you trusts linen and time. The shift under your gown is not underwear in our modern sense. It is a wick. The old word bath stretches to accommodate rubbing with cloths, dusting with powders, airing bedding, steaming in a corner with a pot of water when your chest is tight. Soap, when it appears, is more likely to go to the linens than to the limbs. Linen makes this possible because of how it behaves. Flax fibers have that clean, cool hand for which the wealthy will one day pay brand premiums. In the pre-plumbing world, they pay with labor. Woven tight, it slides. Woven loose, it drinks. A fresh shift under bodice siphons sweat the way a candle wick pulls wax, so that the layer touching the skin is always trying to become a slightly better version of itself, drier, cooler, less sticky, until it too must be swapped for something cleaner. In houses that can afford the rotation, women change linen often, sometimes daily, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day in summer or under layers of ceremony. In poorer rooms, the rhythm slows. You rinse at the basin and let the sun do the rest. Either way, cloth is the prosthesis that makes clean thinkable without a tub. The powders assist. They sit in boxes with polite names and practical jobs. To dull shine where fabric cannot reach, to quiet chafing, to perfume the zone where cloth meets skin. Starch is everywhere, bred in another life. But it is also a dry little sponge that, brushed on the inside of collars or sifted into the hollows under the arms, drinks what the day produces. Fuller's earth, clay scraped from the ground and sold by weight, has a better appetite, pulling grease from cloth and dusted lightly from skin. The romantic among us will prefer orris root, powdered iris rhizome that smells faintly of violets. In some boxes it rides with tiny chips of benzoin resin, which lend a churchy sweetness to the work of not smelling like a kitchen. Chalk has its hour too, judiciously applied to spots that need a quick rescue. None of these powders are exotic. They are the pantry applied to the person, and they make the body less of a stain on the day. Now widen the lens to include the infrastructure that keeps dry baths credible. Monday is wash day in many towns, not because the calendar has opinions, but because the week's working rhythm eventually finds its way to water and fire. Laundresses, whether hired by the day or living within the household, stack the dirty linen, soap, ash, and tools. There is a bucking tub, a tall barrel drilled near the bottom. Linen goes in layers, hottest and rankest at the top. Lye, made from ashes and water, is poured over. Gravity pulls the caustic brew down through the cloth and into a vessel below. Hours pass. Then the hauling begins. Drag the heavy lye-soaked mass to the copper. Boil. Lift to the river. Beat on stones. Rinse until the water runs something like clear. Wring by hand, a violence visited on the washer's wrists and spine. Spread on hedges to dry and bleach in sun and wind. Bluing, smalt or indigo, arrives like a magician's trick to tilt the yellow back toward white. Ironing follows, with heavy implements that glow faintly if you touch them wrong and arc right if you learn from your mother, and she from hers. The whiteness you see at court or on market day is not innocence. It is heat, chemistry, and women's backs. Nothing about this is private. The riverbank becomes a stage. Gossip, singing, fights with boys who splash, warnings from the city about where you may rinse and when. Ordinances pop up that read like a municipal nose. Do not wash where the tannery drains. Do not dung the path with a bucking tub. Do not let soap lye scorch the fish. In cities, bathhouses once served as communal wet solutions to the dirt of work. When those declined, through moral panic, disease, or a simple mismatch between fuel and appetite, the laundress's world swelled to fill the hygiene gap. The public theatre of washing shifts the shame. The lady's clean neckline is a private signal of virtue. The laundress's steaming cauldron is a public reminder of what it costs. The household, meanwhile, practices small wet rituals in between the big ones. Basins stand ready by the door for hand washing, a medieval hospitality that never entirely dies. Guests wash before meals not just for cleanliness, but as a little theatre of self-command. Ewers and towels travel to bedrooms in the morning. Spittoons and toothpicks hover by the hearth, because dental hygiene is as much about not letting food rot in your mouth as it is about powders and pastes. A foot bath arrives on winter evenings. A wooden tub, steam making halos in the draft. Vinegar waters rinse the armpits and groin when the air is warm. In fever, cool cloths are rotated like rosary beads through bowls. Sweating cures. 10 minutes under blankets after a hot posset are the home sauna for those who need one and fear the bath. You could live like this for months and never step into a deep tub except to sit with a pulled muscle or to recover after childbirth. Why the caution, beyond logistics? Because humoral medicine sits beside the fire and narrates the body. Too much wet unbalances a cold, phlegmatic nature. Too much heat dries and hardens. Wind in the pores after a bath invites illness. Physicians, especially in northern climates, recommend temperance in all things and moisture in the right places. Hands and face early, feet at night, head washed rarely, hair oiled and combed instead. This is not ignorance so much as a different physics of health. They are wrong about miasmas and pores. They are right that the body responds to temperature and humidity. The dry bath is a compromise in the face of those beliefs and the material fact of expensive fuel. Class edits the script. A lady with a linen chest big enough to shelter a child can pop clean on and off like a costume change. Each fresh shift a microbath sanctioned by wealth. A laundress's own linen is a humbler affair. Mended to transparency, rinsed more than boiled, aired more than blued. The scent of clean also stratifies. The rich can afford orange blossom water or rosemary distillations to freshen cloth. The poor rely on sun and a good wind. Both know that sunlight bleaches and sweetens. That line of white along the hedge is a chemistry lesson in slow motion. And both know that wool blankets hold stories none of us care to hear. To air bedding is to launder a room without a mop. So where does soap live in this soapless world? In the scullery, in the laundry, in the hands. Hard white soaps, Castile and its cousins, are imported luxuries in many regions. They make their way to hands and face and the odd ceremonial bath. Soft lye soaps scratch and sting. You use them on things you can scald afterward, which is to say, fabric, floors, wooden bowls. The modern fantasy that a bar of soap lives by the tub and migrates to the whole body daily is a feature of plumbing. In the world we're walking through, soap is a tool that teaches respect. Its presence in a room means work will follow, not that leisure has arrived. Hair changes the angle of approach again. It is both banner and chore. The rules about washing it are conservative. Head colds, pores, drafts, all the usual villains. So the maintenance plan is oil and comb, not shampoo and spray. Combs are cleaned, head cloths change. Knit combs appear when they must, which is more often in cities than in farms if we believe the complaints. Powder is not just theatre. Dusting roots helps with oil, helps with smell, helps hair do what pins command. Wigs turn the scalp into a barber's problem, and barbers are efficient when paid. The disgusting stories skip the work. The ledgers are haunted by combs. Step outside and you meet a parallel universe that complicates the stereotype of an unwashed Europe. In Mediterranean towns, baths linger longer. In the Ottoman world, the hammam is a social machine where soap sings on skin and gossip curls like steam. In northern monasteries, there are rules about weekly baths for the sick and foot washing for guests. In some cities, bathhouses reinvent themselves as medical steam rooms when morals or disease close the old model. A wife who has never stepped into a public bath may still know exactly how a sweating room feels on a winter chest. Geography and theology tilt the scale, but everywhere the constant is this: women keep people clean with tools that do not look like ours. Because those tools are everywhere, They slide into memory as quaint. They are anything but. The shift, the towel, the napkin, the pillowcase, the handkerchief, all the small cloths are machines that run on labor and time. The person whose hands boil and wring them writes the biography of a household's cleanliness. Her work is invisible in portraits and loud in accounts. Bucking ash, soap rendered from scraps of fat, urine saved for fulling, indigo rationed, ironing done with sleeves rolled up and a jaw set like a vow. If you think a clean collar is a small thing, you have never ironed for a family in July. Smell. Let's talk about smell, because that is the talisman modern viewers clutch when they judge. A dry bath world does not pretend the body is odorless. It tries to choreograph odor so that it never reads as chaos. Linen suppresses and mediates. Powders absorb. A change of shift at midday edits the narrative. Kitchens smell of meat and smoke. Tanneries make the neighborhood a dare. Fish markets announce themselves. Animals live nearby. To live without modern deodorants is not to live in a cartoon cloud of filth. It is to participate in a busy ecology of smells, where the goal is not zero, but signal. You smell like a person who has a house, work, rank. If you can't erase the world, you can choose to smell like the parts of it that flatter you. Bread and linen, rose and resin, rather than like last night's stew. That is what the powders and cloths do. They bias the world toward a better story. There is humor here if you want it, but not the kind the pamphleteers enjoyed. Imagine a procession of shifts on a hedge, each a ghost of yesterday's decisions. A gust lifts them, and the lane suddenly hosts a troupe of pale dancers. A dog bolts. A boy trips on a bucket. An old woman mutters that bluing is a new-fangled trick that will rot your children. Somewhere a city official writes a stern rule about which side of the bridge may host wash and which side fish, and no one obeys it until the fines bite. The comedy is municipal, not bodily. Humans trying to choreograph water in a world where firewood is slow. If you are tempted to sneer, pour a mental bucket and feel its weight. An average household without servants lives on arithmetic. How many pails to fill a tub high enough for a real bath? How many trips to the pump or the well is that? How much wood to heat it? And how many hours shaved off someone else's work to stand there and tend it? If the answer is too many, you bathe in sections. One body part at a time. Bird baths at a washstand. Feet later. Hair last week. A full soak at New Year, or when the midwife says so. A class that has plumbing calls this disgusting because it confuses scarcity with negligence. The people in the room call it Tuesday. And so the shift matters more than the soap, the copper more than the tub, the ewer more than the shower. Which does not mean people were indifferent to comfort. They were inventive. Linen stored with herbs to keep moths honest makes drawers smell like gardens. Shirts are laid on bricks warmed at the hearth so that the first touch of clean is also warm. In summer, shifts hung in a shaded breeze come back into the room with a wind still trapped in their warp. You can stand inside a garment like that and feel a temperature drop without touching water. Some technologies are primitive only in the sense that they do not plug in. Once you see this system, portraits change. The whiteness at a collar is no longer chalk, but proof of someone else's scalded hands. The gathered sleeves of a chemise under a bodice read like a filter installed between skin and wool. Even the long-running joke about 10 layers looks different when you realize layers are not merely fashion, but engineering. Air between cloth regulates temperature. Cloth against skin manages oil. Outer layers protect washables from what the street throws. The wardrobe is a hygiene machine you can walk around in. And yet, even with linen doing its quiet work, the world presses. The glove smells of the tannery, the hallway of damp stone, the street of horses and fish, which is why dry baths have a companion technology we meet in the next room. Scent. Not the cloying fog of romance novel perfume, but a practical pharmacopoeia of orange blossom, rosemary, benzoin, myrtle. A glove, perfumed, is a glove made bearable. A pomander carried to the nose is a pocket veto against a tanner's alley. A handkerchief, kissed with rosewater, is the difference between tolerance and a headache. Scent is not a mask for dirt. It is the negotiated treaty that allows dry cleanliness to survive in a world that still has a nose. We'll walk there now, into the workshop, where leather is scrubbed of its past with citrus and smoke, into the gallery where a silver chain swings a small globe of spice beneath a woman's lips, into the square where a breeze can turn strangers into neighbors or enemies, depending on what it picks up. Cloth has done what it can. The rest is the art of choosing what the air says about you. Chapter 4. Scent as Armor. Pomanders, perfume gloves, and power cloth has done its quiet duty. Now the air gets a job. In a world where clean rarely means immersion, scent is not a luxury fog, but an instrument. Part medicine, part etiquette, part politics. You do not conquer smell, you negotiate with it. The tools lay ready, a silver pomander on a chain, a handkerchief damp with orange flower water, a pair of kid-skin gloves that no longer confess the tannery. Each is a small technology for editing the world to tolerable. Start with the pomander. It looks like jewelry, filigree spheres, sometimes hinged like fruit, sometimes compartmented like a spice box. But it is really a portable theory of disease. If foul air sickens, then good air must heal. If city streets breathe tanneries, fish, dung, and smoke, then your nose needs cover. Inside goes a paste or a mixture. Shavings of benzoin and storax for their balsamic weight. Clove, cinnamon, nutmeg, crushed to warmth. A citrus peel dried to a curl. Perhaps a scrap of ambergris if fortune has been kind to someone's ship. Perhaps musk or civet if fashion permits animal shadow. Honey or wax binds the mass. Spirit of wine or vinegar brightens it. A more homespun version is a dried orange studded with cloves. The pomander we still make at holidays without remembering we are imitating a defensive tool. Either way, the globe hangs near the mouth, a private weather system you control with a wrist. Perfume gloves tackle a different problem. Works residue. Leather keeps out cold and reins in gesture, but tanning leaves a biography behind. Urine, dung, months of cure. Perfumers were not merely gilding a lily when they bathed gloves in scent. They were erasing a smell that proclaimed the factory at the fingertips of a lady who preferred to proclaim court. Solutions varied. Gloves might be washed in rose or orange blossom distillations, macerated with clove, cinnamon, and myrtle, dusted with musk powder, tucked in drawers with sweet bags, sachets of lavender, rosemary, and orris root that would lead a careful nose to think garden instead of yard. The craft was technical. Too much oil stains, too little fails. Spirit carries aroma in fast, bright bursts. Resins fix it, slowing the fade. A few houses became famous for a particular leather scent, warm, spicy, faintly smoky, that later centuries would call simply Spanish. The glove, reborn, stops smelling like work and starts smelling like rank. Notice how unromantic this is when you strip away the lacquer of later perfume culture. The pomander is not a love charm. It is a veto against a tanner's alley or a sick room. The glove is not a seduction device. It is a safety filter that lets a hand touch a world processed through animals. Scent here is not a mask for dirt so much as a policy for traffic. If you cannot purify the street, purify your immediate air. If you cannot rebuild the city's industry, domesticate its smell at the boundary of your skin. In that sense, scent belongs with linen and powder as a hygiene system. Less fragrance, more atmosphere engineering. And like linen, scent runs on labor and trade. The still room, a domestic laboratory that belongs as much to women as to any guild. tends copper alembics as if they were pets. Rose petals, marjoram, rosemary, sage, and lemon peel submit to heat and patient collection. The cooling worm whispers into a waiting receiver. What drips is a thin, sharp water that will never pass for a garden, but can rinse a handkerchief to a polite ghost of it. The stronger stuff, the absolutes of power, arrive from farther afield. Ambergris rides in from whaling grounds. Musk travels the long way down trade routes. Civet arrives in little pots that make even perfumers wince before they bless its fixative magic. Spices cross oceans in a chain of credit and hazard. Citrus groves in warmer latitudes push blossoms that will never see a frost. Scent puts an empire in a bottle. To wear it is to wear logistics. Power, then, is stitched into smell. In a court gallery, a certain orange blossom note announces someone arrived with access. A musky leather hints money beyond what cloth alone can say. A lady's pomander can be as declarative as a herald's tabard. Even the right to smell like something not local, like resin from far forests or a spice from ships, speaks softly of rank. But scent's power is not purely vertical. It also polices the horizontal boundaries of intimacy. You offer a perfume glove, clean, warm, disciplined, to a foreign ambassador, and say with your hand what you cannot yet say with your tongue. You raise a scented handkerchief delicately when the king's hawks are brought in from the mews and declare politely that you are not an animal. You lift a pomander to your nose in a crowded church and draw a curtain between your breath and the multitudes. Of course, the moralists scowl. Scent slides easily into a sermon about deceit. If God made bodies to smell like bodies, then what does it mean to smell like flowers? But the church's own incense tells on that argument. The difference between liturgy and vanity is not a molecule, but a context. The same benzoin that sanctifies a knave civilizes a glove. Coins decide. So do fears. During sickness seasons, physicians prescribe sponges soaked in aromatic vinegars. Posies are tucked in sleeves. Pomanders swing like metronomes for nerves. The miasma theory is wrong about disease, right about anxiety. People breathe easier when they can dominate what they smell. Because scent is public, it attracts rumor. The most durable is the poison glove, a cautionary tale in which a woman's perfume kidskin kills with stealth. It has everything a pamphleteer could want: luxury, foreignness, female agency, death by ornament. It instructs the audience to fear women's tools and the foreign trades that fill their drawers. The glove, practical and restorative in the workaday city, becomes a stage prop for xenophobia and misogyny. History, when asked to find the bodies, usually finds gossip instead. A scented glove is almost always just that, an edited piece of leather that lets civilization shake hands with itself. Because scent is expensive in its strongest forms, cheaper variants flourish below stairs and beyond palaces. Sweet bags are democratic, scraps of linen stitched shut with lavender, orris, and rosemary, and they serve everywhere. Trunks, chests, sleeves, bodices, between sheets. Strewing herbs do the same on floors. A mixture of rushes and greens scattered to cushion steps and teach the room to smell like meadow instead of kennel. Vinegar waters are the poor person's cologne. Pungent but brisk. A 1-minute edit for hands that have done labor. Even plain air has a scent technology. Opening shutters at dawn to flood a house with the hour's cold breath, then closing them before the street wakes fully. The household makes a theatre of wind. Guilds and regulations formalize the olfactory economy. In some cities, perfumers are their own trade. In others, they are cousins to apothecaries, borrowing stills and recipes from medicine and selling scent alongside pomades and tooth powders. Glove makers and perfumers fight and flirt. One needs the other to make leather respectable. The other needs the first to keep product moving on hands. City fathers write ordinances about where tanning may take place, which is to say, where its smell may not. The law becomes a nose trained on the map. Gender threads the story. Women bear the social burden of smell management in the household. They store linens with herbs, scald chamber pots with lye and resinous waters, dab sheets with orris for guests, decide whether the kitchen needs a handful of rosemary on the hook at market, because today's joint smells like travel. At court, they also carry the technologies of status smell, gloves, pomanders, sachets, because their bodies are the stage on which hierarchy likes to perform its ideas. Men are not absent. Barbers scent beard pomades, courtiers powder hair, soldiers oil gloves against wet. But when a jest needs a nose to blame, it will be a woman's. What does a scented glove feel like on the hand? Smooth, yes. Kid is a second skin, but also slightly ceremonial, a reminder that you are wearing an argument. The glove says, "This hand belongs to a person who does not labor with hides. This hand will not bring the tannery to the table." The scent is not huge. It is close. Lean in to speak, and you will catch it. Pass by and the room stays intact. The pomander's radius is smaller still, a private chapel for the face. These are personal atmospheres, not fogs. The modern horror of perfume that enters before the person belongs more to atomizers and department stores than to still rooms and sachets. If scent is armor, it is also archive. Open a chest that has kept a family's linen for a generation, and you will read a history of what they could afford and what they feared. Lavender and orris for wealth and moths, rosemary for kitchens, benzoin for ambition, orange flower for summers they wished would never end. A travel cloak might smell faintly of smoke and pine because someone made peace with nights on the road. Wedding gloves might trap orange blossom and cinnamon because someone wanted guests to remember more than fabric. Time writes itself in smell as surely as in ink. There is strategy even in what you choose not to mask. A brewer's wife may let a hint of malt cling to her shawl. It reads as honest bread. A court lady may keep the leather note in her gloves. It reads as a cosmopolitan city at her fingertips. A midwife may prefer vinegar sharpness to sweetness. It reads as clean work done quickly. The fantasy that everyone wanted to smell like a rose all the time is modern. Historical noses enjoyed harmony more than subtraction. Linen plus herb plus clean leather plus a top note to suit the occasion. One more knot to untie. Scent as class cruelty. It is easy to weaponize perfume, to declare other people's smells barbarous while baptizing your own as refined. Cities did this to their poor. Nations did it to each other. The whiff labeled foreign rotates with the wind. Scent, wielded without humility, can turn a hygiene tool into a map of contempt. The past did this often. So do we. If we want to read their bottles without repeating their sneer, we keep asking, what work is this smell doing, for whom, and at whose expense? By now, the hygiene machine in front of us, linen, powder, glove, pomander, sachet, still room, feels less like a quaint cabinet of curiosities and more like infrastructure. And it explains something that otherwise looks like contradiction. Why not bathing, in our modern sense, could coexist with strict standards of presentation. These standards were enforced by architecture, medicine, climate, and economy. Scent was the flex spacer that let people move among them without despairing. If you cannot change the river, you can carry a river of orange blossom around your mouth. If you cannot abolish leather's past, you can teach your glove to tell a different story. But scent's dominion ends where hair begins. Hair is the social flag you wear on your skull, more stubborn than skin, more exposed than linen, a creature with its own oils and appetites. It carries smell greedily. It takes direction reluctantly. It stages fashion's dramas and biology's inconveniences in the same frame. To keep it clean without a shower is another art. Oils and powders, pins and patience, knit combs and nerve. That is the next room on our tour. The glove will lay its argument aside. The pomander will rest against silk. The combs are already on the table. Chapter 5. Hair, Oil, Powder. Fashioning cleanliness and fighting lice. The combs are out. The room sounds different. Linen whispered, perfume hummed, hair crackles. It holds scent greedily, dust faithfully, gossip permanently. If skin can be edited every morning with cloth and paint, hair is the ledger that resists quick erasure. The project of clean now becomes choreography. Oil to tame, powder to mattify, pins to command, heat to set, and when all else fails, steel to shave. A head is a stage. Order is the show. Start with the tool that does not brag, the comb. There are two kinds, and the distinction matters. The wide-toothed comb keeps peace. It separates, detangles, draws oil from scalp to ends. The knit comb makes war. Its teeth are so close they sing on the hair, driving eggs and lice toward a basin lined with a cloth you can burn. Every house that has children has at least one knit comb, as dependable as rain. City folk needed it more often than farmers, crowded churches, schools, inns. But no one was exempt. Satirists loved to exaggerate infestation. Ledgers record the cure, patience, oil, vinegar, and time. Oil is not dirt in this world. It's diplomacy. We read grease and think neglect. They read pomatum and think discipline. Hair grows from a scalp that makes its own polish. Without shampoo, that polish sits at the roots and sulks. Enter oils that move the shine where it belongs. Olive in southern kitchens, sweet almond in richer rooms. Rendered fats in households that keep pigs and value nothing wasted. Pomatum, pomade, comes to dominate fashionable dressing tables. Tallow or lard beaten with beeswax until it learns manners, then scented with citrus peel, rose, orris or bergamot if someone knows a merchant. Worked lightly through hair, it behaves like a valet, smoothing, bundling flyaways, sealing ends against winter air. It is also a trap when misused. Too much turns a head into pastry, which the powder will punish with clumps. Powder rescues and defines. Starch, wheat or rice, makes the classic cloud. Orris root lends a ghost of violets and a gentler feel. Fuller's earth dusted through the roots will drink more than it boasts. Powder's first job is practical. It eats shine, dissuades smell, gives pins traction, helps hair hold a shape in rooms without hairspray. Its second job is audible. It declares a class code in the 18th century, when white powdered hair and wigs become a kind of uniform for those who can afford the performance. You see a powdered head, and you read, access to servants, time, a closet where powder can fly without choking everyone at breakfast. That is why some houses build powder in closets, little rooms with hoods and curtains to trap the storm. You step inside, bend forward, and vanish into a snowfall. When you emerge, the past has become matte. Wigs were filthy is a meme that deserves its own comb. In truth, perukes and toupees were maintenance heavy and therefore often cleaner than neglected natural hair, because a wig can be taken off and cleaned by someone whose job it is to care. A barber scrubs, dries on a block, beats powder through, oils the base, sews loose wefts, perfumes lightly, then sends the thing back to the head it serves. Beneath it, many men, and some women, kept the scalp shaved or very short, not as surrender to vermin, but as control over them. The famous towers of women's hair. Sometimes they were structures of false hair, pads, and wire perched on a foundation that still saw the net comb. Mice in coiffures make excellent cartoons and terrible sauces. Animals like kitchens. Lice management was not a medieval shrug. It was a schedule. Vinegar rinses loosened knit's glue. Warm oil suffocated the stubborn. The knit comb did the rest. Apothecaries sold harsher weapons, mercurial corrosive sublimate, stavesaker, delphinium, seed powders, sulfur fumigations, each with its own risks and smells. Mothers preferred remedies that didn't poison the house. Cap with oil and linen overnight. Comb at dawn. Wash the cap. Repeat. Schools had those weeks. So did troops marching through towns. So did pilgrim seasons. A clean head was not a promise. It was a practice. Wash or not wash. Here, medicine and climate still stand by the door with a raised eyebrow. The prudent routine in colder, damper regions. Wash the head rarely, and then with care. Egg yolk or stale beer and herbs for a gentle cleanse. Or a little soft soap if you can stand the sting. Followed by thorough drying by the fire and protective oil. In warmer climates and seasons, water comes closer to the scalp, but even then people guard against drafts and night air. Caps, linen coifs, nightcaps, kerchiefs are not only modesty, they are hygiene tools, keeping hair collected and cleaner between interventions, protecting linen at pillow and hat. If you picture filthy heads under those caps, try another picture. A modest little ecosystem of cloth, oil, and powder that keeps hair from colonizing the day. Fashion makes every practical step do double duty. A smooth, oiled hairline lets a lady's headdress sit without biting. Powdered roots photograph well in portraits. Light catches the shape instead of the scalp. In some courts, a plucked hairline and kept temples signal rank. In others, a darker, oiled part says, "I work," which is not always an insult. Men's queues, the tied pigtails of soldiers and clerks, are not mere ornament. They're a tidy solution for hair in long coats and narrow desks. The queue ribbon catches sweat and keeps it off collars that would otherwise visit the copper too soon. Even the powder tax, hello, late 18th century Britain, tells you that hair is a public matter. Governments notice what's popular and bill it. Satire hovers, as ever, finding a way to turn women's maintenance into evidence of moral weakness. "Pomatum stinks," writes one crank, and you can tell from 2 rooms away he has never stood in a tannery. Another complains that powder soils furniture, as if ash from hearths did not. The jokes about unwashed hair for months glide over the habits of combing and sectional washing, over vinegar rubs, over the domestic knowledge of when to air pillows on a frosty morning so bedding doesn't talk back. The joke simplifies, the household complicates. Children are the truth test. A mother with 3 little heads at different stages of mischief cannot afford illusions. She oils for knots, combs for knits, braids for school, and teaches the rhythm of caps, work cap, church cap, bed cap, because fabric is the cheapest technology that works. She knows when to surrender and shear. Many childhood portraits show hair cropped close not as punishment, but as hygiene. She also knows what scent to allow in hair, orris, faint, because sugar on heads invites bees in summer and headaches in winter. Her ledger, time, not money, decides how often anyone gets a wet wash. Barbers and hairdressers, the guild cousins of surgeons and tailors, bring the public theatre. Their shops are half workshop, half rumour mill. On the pegs, wigs drying to the pail of bread. On the bench, blocks like strange wooden heads. On the shelf, pomatum pots, powder cones, scented waters, knit combs in a jar like a bouquet of tiny rakes. They shave, curl, queue, powder. They also clean. A good barber keeps vermin moving out, not in. Licensure and inspection rise and fall with cities' anxieties, but the trade polices itself where reputation matters. A fashionable head that leaves too many flakes on a chair costs business. Textiles do more than protect, they signal. A crisp linen cap with a fresh edge says clean, louder than any soap could have without plumbing. A powder hood, tied under the chin for the morning's dusting, is a sign of care and nuisance both. Everyone else in the room sneezes and forgives you because they understand the maintenance contract a status hairstyle imposes. When the wind turns, whole cities soften, storms dampen powder, oils stiffen, and hair collapses. Weather becomes a stylist. The materials have their own biographies. Orris root takes years to cure before it smells right. Tallow reflects kitchen economics and religious calendars. Beeswax drags beehives into boudoirs. Bergamot rides from Calabria. Benzoins from Southeast Asia. Rice powder from trade webs that, by the 18th century, touch every reckless scheme on the seas. When a head smells pleasantly violet and looks candid white, it is a map of ships, fields, hives, mills, and women's hands. Disgusting, deployed lazily, erases that map. What did a good hair day feel like? Secure mostly. Pins that don't slip. A Q ribbon that stays tied. Powder that doesn't squeak chalky on the neck. A cap that sits without itching. The faint tug of pomatum when you turn your head too fast. A reminder of discipline. On a bad day, you smell too much of kitchen or stable. Powder cakes above the ears. A pin bites behind the temple. And the knit comb leans on the basin, inviting you to cancel your afternoon. Domestic life is glamorous only at the distance of oil paint. You can hear modern impatience. Just wash it. But that imperative presumes pipes, heat on demand, hours to spare, and a culture that reads wet hair in public as neutral. In rooms where a damp head is a health risk, a draft is a villain, and fuel has better jobs. Cleanliness becomes a ring you wear on your finger, a set of repeatable habits, comb, oil, powder, cap, air, that keep the body from frightening the linen. It is not our system, but it is a system. Hair also coordinates with scent. A perfume glove is a controlled halo. Hair, if over-scented, is a weather system. Most people aim smaller. A little orris in powder, maybe rosemary water dabbed on a comb, an orange blossom rinse for festivals. The restraint is partly cost and partly courtesy. You live nose to nose with family and servants. An overwhelming hair announces selfishness. Clean, in this register, is a social agreement as much as a scalp condition. When you step back, the trilogy of the body's surface, face, hair, cloth, resolves into a single technology of presentation. Face declares order with finish. Hair declares it with contour. Cloth guarantees it by touching skin first. Lice, sweat, soot, and seasons are relentless test proctors. But the household has its answer key. It is inelegant, repetitive, effective enough, and built above all on women's time. There is one more stage where clean meets appetite and technology and produces a result both intimate and public, the mouth. Here the powders are harsher, the stakes higher, the myths stickier. Sugar enters as delight and leaves as ruin. Chalk and pumice promise polish and often deliver loss. Breath is a social credential with its own recipes and lies. We leave the combs on the table, the powder settling in their teeth like frost, and walk to the basin where cups and tongues learn what the past thought a clean smile meant. Chapter 6. Teeth of chalk and sugar. Gritty powders, rotten smiles. The basin is set a little apart from the fire, close enough for light, far enough that steam won't fog the mirror. On the board, a linen rag rolled tight, a little horn cup, a packet of powder that looks like flour and behaves like stone. Hair could be persuaded with oil and patience. The mouth is less polite. It is appetite and display at once, a place where you greet a guest and swallow a day. Clean, here, means three things. No leftovers, no smell, no shame. And history solves those with powders, picks, rinses, and when things go wrong, steel. Start with the simplest routine you hardly see in paintings. Pick, rub, rinse. Toothpicks were everywhere. Quills, slivers of wood, silver tools that fold like knives, because getting food out of your teeth was both manners and medicine. A table might even offer communal picks, alongside a basin and towel, the way we offer napkins no one thinks twice about. Then the rubbing, linen wrapped around a finger, dipped in wine, vinegar, or prepared tooth water, and passed across the teeth until the day's film surrendered. Rinsing followed, often with water spiked by habit, salt for briskness, wine for courage, vinegar for nerve. None of this is glamorous. All of it is hygiene. The powders are where things get crunchy. They are mixtures of worlds that don't belong in a mouth: quarry and shell, hearth and grove, ground fine and told to behave as Polish. Common ingredients read like a geologist's picnic: chalk, calcium carbonate, burnt bone, bone ash, powdered oyster or cuttlefish shell, pumice, brick dust in the houses that couldn't afford gentler grit. The softer recipes soften further with starch or breadcrumbs. The fancier ones perfume themselves with orris or mint. Throw in a little myrrh or mastic for a resinous, clean feeling, and boast of imported powders shaved from coral. Every one of them removes stain and enamel. A clean smile, in this arithmetic, is a calculated loss. Brightness against thickness, smoothness against the future. Charcoal appears as the dark paradox in the box. Black powder promising white teeth. Burnt bread, charred twigs, willow sticks rubbed to fibre. Abrasives with a little chemistry, absorbing stink as they scour. Used gently, they can help. Used like a grudge, they sand the years away. The still room adds its logic. Sage leaves rubbed on the teeth to sweeten breath. Salt and honey pastes, which comfort but feed a problem. Waters steeped with rosemary, mint, alum and myrrh. Apothecaries sell more aggressive washes, spirit of wine with camphor, vinegar tinctures cut with alum, even solutions edged with corrosive sublimate. Recipes that promise to close spongy gums and often leave them sulking. If you want to know why powders got so popular, count incentives the way we did at the dressing table. First, visibility. A courtier's mouth is a political instrument. It smiles at ambassadors, eats at long tables, kisses hands, speaks for a family. A darkened or broken front tooth is not merely pain, it's a message. Second, breath. A crowded city is already an olfactory argument. A mouth that adds to it is social sabotage. Chewing aniseed or fennel, sucking a clove, popping a comfit, a sugar-coated spice, are not just after-dinner toys. They are portable solutions to the fact that meat travels badly and garlic is generous. Third, the new guest at Europe's table, sugar. Sugar arrives first as a spice, rare, expensive, medical, and then, as trade swells, as a food that means celebration. It walks into weddings and saints' days, into royal gifts and ordinary indulgence, into tea when tea arrives, into coffee and chocolate when they follow. It brightens illnesses and ruins mouths. Elites are the first to rot because they can afford to. The poor keep their teeth not because they have better habits, but because they have fewer opportunities to be fashionable. Every traveller's remark about a queen's blackened teeth, Elizabeth is the stock example, should be read as an economic footnote. Sugar is status in the pantry and disaster in the jaw. Pregnancy complicates the ledger further. Folklore blamed babies for stealing a mother's teeth. Biology blames vomiting, diet shifts, and inflammation. Whatever the cause, midwives and household books respond with gentler rubs, sage, salt, and directions to avoid the stronger acids and scourers. The still room's pharmacy leans toward myrrh and wine as a mouth rinse after birth, not because it's modern dentistry, but because it's what they trust to calm a bleeding mouth in an era when gums argue with the body's big changes. Professional help exists, and it is loud. Barber surgeons and later specialists pull teeth with instruments that sound like insults. The pelican, the turnkey. Levering roots out with a twist you felt in your toes. They cauterize sockets with hot irons or searing waters. Sell drops that promise to kill worms. A metaphor, then a myth, then a sales pitch. And offer false teeth of ivory or carved bone that look good in candlelight and creak in life. A lady might own a partial set for the front, save for dinners and portraits, held with springs or wired to surviving teeth. It works until it doesn't, at which point the springs can force the mouth shut in sleep, like a practical joke played by pain. The myth of perfect historical smiles collapses under the bench where these devices are repaired. Etiquette polices mouths as fiercely as mirrors do. Spitting is normal in many centuries. It is also embarrassing if done without art. Rooms provide spittoons. Streets provide corners. Napkins, linen's small cavalry, handle half the problem. You hide the mouth when you pick your teeth. You never leave the pick on the table. You certainly don't tuck it in your hat. Breath is conversation. Keeping it neutral is a duty. That is why the pomanders of the previous chapter sometimes carry rosemary vinegar, one sniff for the city, one dab for the tongue. That is why comfits exist. Sugar turning clove or caraway into social weapons of mass discretion. Do women do more? They do more of everything domestic. So yes, more rinsing of cups, more washing of children's mouths with a cloth, more mixing of powders and waters, more negotiation with pregnancy's grievances, more hiding of pain because pain is impolite. But the tools are not sexed, not really. Men chew fennel and pick their teeth with the best of them. Soldiers line up to have diseased molars yanked before a campaign, because nothing ruins a march like a mouth that throbs. Monks write recipes. Queens accept compliments they did not earn alone. Some laundress scoured the napkins that kept the mouth routine tidy. A few cultural detours remind us that Europe wasn't alone in inventing ways to keep breath bearable and teeth attached. The Islamic world's miswak, chewing sticks from Salvadora persica, cleans by both chemistry and fiber, a technology so good it survives modernity's temptation to sell plastic for everything. Mediterranean mastic resin is chewed for hours, a slow perfume and a gum strengthener both. China knows bristle brushes early. Europe learns and domesticates them late. Boar bristles in bone handles that shed, taste like a farmyard, and still feel like a miracle if your routine was linen and hope. The global history of mouths is a museum of small, brilliant tools that do not require a wall outlet. If you want a satisfying villain beyond sugar, consider the materials that pretend to help and quietly hurt. Alum tightens gums until they refuse to be nourished. Acids whiten by etching enamel into a roughness that stains faster next week. Pumice, gloriously efficient, makes a desert where there used to be a hill. These are not crimes. They are the best bets of people without microscopes trying to make a social life out of a mouth that chews bread full of grit and meat that has opinions. Our age will someday look as foolish for something equally well-intended. The comedy is low and constant. Imagine a court supper with toothpicks as busy as tongues, a hostess lifting a clove to her lips as discreetly as a secret, a gentleman whose false front teeth ping a plate and convert a laugh into a cough. Picture a child at the basin with a burnt bread smear on his mouth declaring himself clean and leaving a charcoal kiss on the towel. Humor belongs here, but it shouldn't be the last word. The last word belongs to labor again, to the person who boiled the linen that wiped the powder, who distilled the rosemary water, who held your hand while the turnkey turned. What did clean feel like in the mouth? Slick fingers on enamel when you run your tongue across. The absence of yesterday's mutton. A momentary violet from orris, a brief heat from clove. The odd decision to enjoy a mint comfit even though it costs a stitch of enamel next year. It felt like being in control of what comes out of your mouth when you open it, in a world that measured you every time you did. As always, the habits attract moral speech. Vanity, deceit, gluttony. Sin smells opportunity. But behind the sermon is a quieter truth. Mouths are social organs. We kiss with them, pray with them, lie and soothe and negotiate and nurse with them. People tried, with the tools they had, to keep those organs tolerable to the people they loved and the rooms they feared. Sometimes they went too far with powders. Sometimes they hadn't a chance against sugar's bright charm or a winter infection. Either way, what looks disgusting from across centuries often looks, up close, like work. Which brings us to another chamber of private work made public by failure. Menstruation. If the mouth taught us that clean could be abrasive and sweet at once, the management of those days will teach us that clean could be quiet, inventive, and political. There is no plumbing in the next room either. Only belts, cloth, vinegar, steam, a drawer with a lock, and the same stubborn choreography of women's time. Chapter 7. Those days. Before plastic, linen belts, pads, and quiet hacks open the drawer that no one names out loud. Inside, narrow belts rolled like snakes, folded squares of linen and flannel, a small bottle of rosemary vinegar, a pouch with pins, a bar of soft brown soap that never migrates to the kitchen. We have arrived at the most private branch of the hygiene tree, the part that fails loudly when it fails, and is otherwise meant to be invisible. If the mouth was public, those days are logistics conducted in whispers. The central technology is cloth, not gauze from a factory, but whatever a household can spare and wash. Old linen chemises cut into rectangles, soft wool flannel reserved for winter, scraps worn thin enough to fold without chafing. A belt, sometimes purpose-made, sometimes a reworked girdle, runs around the waist with tapes or straps that drop between the legs. The pad ties on, or buttons, or pins. It is thicker at night. It is doubled again for travel or for days when the body argues. In grand houses, the kit is neatly stitched. In poorer ones, it's a roll of good rags, kept high from children's games. Cleanliness here is engineering. Keep cloth where cloth can do the best. Keep it from moving. Keep it from announcing itself to anyone who hasn't earned the right to know. Washing is the second half of the technology. Fresh blood wants cold water first. Every laundress knows that. Or else you cook the stain and live with it. So the pads soak in a bucket set discreetly by the hearth, or in the yard, sometimes salted, sometimes touched with vinegar. Then they get their time in the copper with the week's whitewash. Lye works, but you treat it with respect. Hands and mucous membranes do not forgive caustic soap. Sun does the rest, bleaches, sweetens, tells neighbours you're a person who minds her linen. If the weather refuses, lines are strung indoors. A screen appears. A child is told not to touch. Clean, here, is a choreography of buckets and privacy. Silence surrounds the choreography, but it is not absolute. Markets sell women's cloths under names that protect everyone's dignity. Midwives write about postpartum flows, which are louder cousins of monthly ones. Physicians have their theories about temperament and menses and prescribe accordingly. Warming broths, rest, sometimes a walk to set the body's clock. Too much, too little, too late, too soon. The words are medical and moral at once. A regular cycle reads as health and self-command. Disruptions become a pretext for advice you did not ask for. Variation is the rule across regions and classes. In some towns, women fold extra linen in their shifts and change it often, letting the garment and gravity do work together. In others, the belt and pad system is standard, especially where women spend hours outside the home or in shops and want insurance against movement. Rural women talk like engineers. More layers on market day because road jostling does not care about your calendar. Darker skirts because stains will happen. An extra apron because work will too. In winter, flannel is kindness. In summer, finer linen and more changes. The cleanest solution is the one that can be repeated under pressure with the tools you already own. Do people ever go without a device and let heavy skirts absorb the month? Sometimes, yes, especially among those with no access to good cloth or privacy for washing. The body and layered garments cooperate, and the laundry tells the tale later. But routine often returns to pads because they concentrate the mess, reduce chafing, and let a person sit without worry in a pew, at a market bench, on a horse. On those days is not a single cultural fact. It's a gradient of solutions bent around fuel, fabric, and time. Intravaginal options exist in the record, but they are not the default, and they sit close to medicine. Sea sponges appear in antiquity and wander forward through medical texts as pessaries. sometimes for contraception or to hold medicaments. Not as everyday hygiene for most households. Some women certainly use them. Midwives certainly knew the tool. But the rhythm of the ordinary month belongs more often to belts and cloth you can boil than to objects you cannot easily sterilize in a kitchen. Pain management is hygiene by another name. Warming pans appear, linen bags filled with heated salt or sand, teapots that become hot water bottles before rubber is invented. Steam is a home remedy. Sit with skirts tented over a small pot of hot water and herbs. Breathe, wait for muscles to unclench. The still room's cabinet opens again. Rosemary and marjoram for comfort. Chamomile for gentleness. Sage when a midwife says so. Stronger plants, pennyroyal, rue, exist in the pharmacology and the rumour mill both. Wise households fear them, use them sparingly or not at all, and never as toys. No one needs a botany lesson that ends in a funeral. The point is not to court danger. It is to keep a person functioning in a world that doesn't pause because a calendar flipped inside their body. Smell, the ever-present social referee, gets a vote. Vinegar waters to rinse the hands after a change. A drop of rose or myrtle water on a cloth before it goes into a pocket. Room windows cracked at dawn to pull a night's air through bed linen. The drawer with the pad smells faintly of orris because orris keeps moths honest and pride intact. If there is a discreet sachet in the chest, lavender, rosemary, no one mentions it. Domestic scent here is not performance, it is mercy. Shame is a character in this story, but not the lead. Work is. Women bleed and still carry water, lift toddlers, stand in market stalls, knead bread, write letters, travel. So the hacks are practical and unsentimental. A folded cloth on a chair you do not own, a just-in-case pouch in the basket, a darker petticoat on days when you must sit long, an old sheet under the top sheet during a heavy night. Bedrooms learn to move furniture a hand's width from the wall so screens can stand. Travel trunks learn to hide a small lidded pot. The comedy pin snapping at the wrong moment, a dog making off with a flannel from the hedge, is acknowledged, then beaten back by better pins and higher lines. Household hierarchy shapes who touch what. In wealthy homes, a lady's maid handles the drawer, the rinse bucket, the screen. The lady pretends nothing happens and tips well because the pretense is labour. In middling homes, sisters conspire and daughters learn fast. In poor homes, the person who owns the copper owns the schedule, and conflict follows if a bucket appears on the wrong day. Men are not ignorant, they are formally ignorant. The pretense shields dignity on all sides. A man does not see the bucket. A woman does not narrate the stain. The laundry dries when the lane is quiet. The social contract of clean depends on this choreography almost as much as on soap. Religion sits nearby, too close to ignore. Ritual churching after childbirth marks a return to public life. It is as much an acknowledgement of bleeding's end as it is a blessing. Fast days and feast days run under cycles and sometimes ignore them. Women calculate around both. In some places, taboos restrict touch or kitchen work during the month. In others, the only rule is don't frighten the men. The gap between theology and practice is bridged, as usual, by women who know how to do the thing and prefer to avoid the argument. Cloth leaves a paper trail. Account books list purchases of fine linen and coarse. Inventories name women's belts, napkins of the small kind, old pieces for the still room, that were once something else and are now what they need to be. City ordinances grumble about buckets left at doors. Midwives' manuals speak tenderly of lochia and warn against too early baths. Doctors oscillate, decade by decade, between praising cold water and condemning it. You can watch the century change by how kindly a text describes a woman washing herself on the third day. Always, beneath the advice, is a material truth. Water costs, fuel costs, time costs. The clean solution is the one that respects those prices. What did it feel like? Secure when everything held and the belt sat where it should. Less secure on hot days when the body resented layers. Clean at the moment of change, when the cool of fresh linen on skin reset the day's math. Tired at night, when the wash bucket still needed attention and the younger child still needed a story. There is a kind of dignity in routines that no one applauds. If you have ever left a bathroom with a stain handled and your composure intact, you have shaken hands across time. Modern disgust likes to play archaeologist with none of the digging. It imagines chaos and calls it the past. The drawer, the belt, the vinegar bottle, the copper, the hedge heavy with drying cloth. These say otherwise. They say system. Not our system, but a system that produced fewer disasters than the jokes imply, and more competence than the moralists conceded. That competence is the theme that keeps returning like a chorus. Women turning household materials into hygiene machines because the plumbing lived in the future and the calendar lived in them. And since we keep teasing water, its presence, its fear, its price, our next step is the place where these private calculations meet the public debate about baths. Doctors warn, then prescribe. Cities build, then shutter. Families risk, then rest. The tub is never just a tub. It is medicine, morality, money, and occasionally joy. Let's walk there now, without dropping the thread from the drawer to the door. How to touch water in a world that suspects it, and how, when illness knocks, water becomes the strongest medicine in the house. Chapter 8. When water was dangerous. Miasmas, rare baths, healing soaks. The drawer closes, the bucket is set aside, and the house stands face to face with the question everyone keeps deferring. How much water can a body afford? Not money, though firewood prices argue loudly, but risk. For centuries, physicians and grandmothers agreed on one uneasy premise. Water is a medicine, and medicines are powerful. You dose them, you do not live on them. The physics behind that caution sounds wrong to us, and it is, but it was coherent inside its world. Bodies were governed by humours, hot, cold, wet, dry, and skin had pores that opened and closed like gates. Hot baths opened gates. Cold air rushed in. Miasmas, the bad breaths of swamps, streets, and sick rooms, could ride right to the heart. This is why letters that praise a convalescent bath in June warn against one in November. It is also why a wise household keeps two truths in its pocket. Avoid bathing when the wind is wicked, and if you must, tie the day to fire, blankets, and patience. So the ordinary week chooses partial solutions. Morning brings a basin for hands and face, a cloth wrung tight, a splash of rose or vinegar water to close what you just opened. Feet get their turn at night. Soak, rub, dry well, warm bricks at the bottom of the bed. The torso is bathed in sections on market days, or when laundry cycles permit privacy. A bath might be steam coaxed from a pot under a shawl, when a cough won't loosen. You can live clean enough like this for a long time, especially if linen carries half the load. Public baths complicate the picture. In many medieval towns, they are as normal as mills. Heated rooms, tubs, a blur of steam and chatter, sometimes mixed, sometimes segregated by hour. They are places to scrape the weak from skin, to hear news, to be human in company. Then disease seasons come. Moralists sharpen quills. Fuel grows dear. The baths acquire a reputation for trouble they sometimes earned and often didn't. Some cities shutter them entirely. Others reinvent them as medical stoves, sweat rooms attached to hospitals, so that steam survives under a new alibi. The tub never stops being a site where health, pleasure, and anxiety argue. Private tubs are furniture and theatre. A rich household keeps a copper or tin bath, oval, shining, heavy as a decision, stored upright, dragged out on days when the ledger, the weather, and the physician make the same face. Servants heat water in relays, kettles, coppers, swinging pails that slop scalding if your foot finds a crack in the floor. The room learns choreography, screens for modesty, cloths to protect rugs, a chair for the bather to climb in and out without turning the afternoon into a comedy of slips. The bath itself is brief compared to its logistics. You undress in a room warmer than usual, step into water that is hot where your shins complain, and cooler where your heart forgives. Wash with a cloth and a sliver of soap. If you're lucky, then reverse the opening of the pores. Towel fast, robe fast, to bed fast. Sit with hot broth and close the gates. The bath is an event. It will not happen again on Thursday. The poor improvise with the tools at hand. A washtub doubles as a bath for children. Adults stand in it and pour water from a jug. 2 pails earning more cleanliness than a dozen complaints. Soap is rationed. Ash and elbow grease intervene. Drafts are enemies. Winter squeezes everything. Water shivers in buckets. Breath ghosts the glass. Fires bite fuel and wallets. You warm a brick. You choose the hour. You accept that a good wash today is hands to elbows, feet to knees, the rest in faith and linen. And yet, turn the map. There are places where water is not suspect but sovereign. The Ottoman hammam is a social engine. Heat, marble, cascades, attendants with mitts that abrade you into a better week. Women claim it as a room where privacy and publicity reconcile. Bodies under steam, gossip that oils alliances, civics of care. Elsewhere, Jewish ritual baths, the mikveh, make water a calendar and a covenant. Hygiene braided to holiness. In Catholic and Protestant Europe, monastic rules hold small islands of routine. Weekly baths for the infirm, foot washing as hospitality, precise directions about when and how the sick are to be warmed and washed. Geography and theology write different scripts for the same physics of skin. Medicine never leaves the stage. Doctors prescribe baths the way we prescribe physical therapy. Tepid for fevers, hot for stiffness, cold for shock. Sitz baths for childbirth recovery, steam for lungs, mineral waters for everything money can imagine. Spas rise as seasonal capitals. Bath, Baden, Vichy, Karlovy Vary. Their promenades as important as their springs. The regimen is half chemical, half social. Drink this many cups before noon, bathe this many minutes after vespers. Stroll, display, be seen getting better. The water is not only inside the tub, it is in the schedule and the gaze. Fear rides alongside. Plague seasons breed specific advice. Avoid baths, keep pores closed. Fumigate rooms with juniper and rosemary. Hold pomanders to the nose. If you bathe, do it mild. Do it fast. Do not step into night air. Later centuries will move the blame from air to fleas. The habit of caution will linger anyway, because fuel and labor remain persuasive even when microbes change the narrative. People remember which routines ended in illness, whether or not the cause was real. Class and gender shape not just access but interpretation. A man who avoids bathing is thrifty, even prudent. A woman who avoids bathing becomes a pamphlet's joke. A lady who bathes privately is luxurious. A laundress who steams in the washhouse doorway is practical. A public bath attendant is suspect. The same water runs through different reputations. Meanwhile, women do the wet work, scalding linens that touched bodies, rinsing pads without making a scene, cooling fevers with cloths until the doctor arrives to take credit. The danger of water is often a danger they manage for other people. Architecture whispers policy. Houses with inner courtyards make washing less theatrical. Houses on lanes make it public. A pump in the kitchen argues for more wet routines. A shared well argues for diplomacy. Drains, when they exist, are statements of wealth and future urban planning. When they don't, slop pails and gutters become social contracts. Ordinances multiply. No emptying buckets at the noon bell. No washing entrails at the bridge. No bathing horses above the drawer for the town fountain. Water's path through a city is a map of its anxieties. The satire this chapter deserves is municipal, not bodily. Picture a councilman composing a rule about bathhouse hours while his laundress boils his shirts in the same street's air. Imagine neighbours quarrelling over whose turn it is at the pump, both of them pretending they don't know exactly why a new screen has appeared in one window this week. Envision a fashionable gentleman denouncing public baths as dens of vice as he schedules a month at a spa to cure a stomach made of claret and oysters. Hypocrisy smells the same in steam. What did a rare full bath feel like? Like a truce. The first minute is negotiation, heat and skin, expectation and reality, followed by a lengthening of the spine you don't notice until a maid laughs that you look taller. Soap bites and then forgives. Cloth glides. A corner of you thinks of laundry and is told to hush. Exiting is strategy. Dry fast, layer linen, warm the bed, close the shutters against drafts, and let the world think you've been in a meeting. In a sense, you have, between your pores and a theory of air. If this sounds like an apology for not bathing, listen harder. The point is not that the past preferred filth. It is that it defined danger differently and arranged labour accordingly. People chased cleanliness with the ideas and fuel they had. Partial washes, linen wicks, scent treaties, steam in sick rooms, baths as prescriptions and holidays. Disgusting usually disappears at the temperature of empathy, which brings us to the way water leaves a house and the people who shepherd it. Cleanliness is not finished when the body dries. It continues in the laundry yard and the night soil lane, in the rules about where you may empty a bucket and who gets paid to carry what you don't want to name. If water in a tub is medicine, water in a gutter is politics. The next chapter is not glamorous. Glamour doesn't survive lie, but it is the hinge on which every clean collar and quiet night depends. The ecology of laundresses and chamber pots, the domestic plumbing before the pipes. Chapter 9. Laundress and chamber pot. The domestic ecology of clean. If water in a tub is medicine, water in a gutter is politics. Cleanliness doesn't end when you towel off. It begins its second life in buckets and lanes, in hedges hung with shirts like flags, in the quiet, repetitive heroism of people who make other people's hygiene possible. The portrait shows a white collar. The street behind it shows what that whiteness took. Start with Monday, the holy day of the copper. In towns from Lisbon to Lubeck, wash day is less a custom than a tide. Linen piles into a bucking tub, layers of shirts and shifts and tablecloths waiting for the slow chemistry of ash and water to begin. Lye trickles through the cloth and collects below, a caustic liquor you respect as you would a sharp-tongued aunt. And after long hours, the hot work starts. Boil, lift, rinse, wring. The verbs alone could sprain you. A good laundress knows temperatures by eye, weather by knuckles, soap strength by a sting on the wrist. She blues the white with a rinse touch by indigo or smalt. She beats stains out on stones with a rhythm the river keeps. She spreads cloth on hedges to bleach in a sun that, for once, is a partner. On ironing day, she wields heavy, sad irons that hold heat like grudges, sprays with water from her mouth when steam is needed, and learns the geometry of ruffs and pleats as if they were fortifications. If a ruff stands like a halo, somewhere a woman's shoulders ache. Soap is not romance either. The fine white bars, the Castiles of song, exist, but the ordinary soap of ordinary houses is soft and brown and smells of its birth. Fires, fats, ash. Ash lye is the great democratizer. Every hearth makes it. Every household can render something from scraps. And every laundress has scars to prove that democracy is rarely gentle. Urine, a mordant, a cleanser, a fixer, appears in recipes with the breezy shamelessness of eras that used every tool the body gave. Fullers beat it through cloth to chase grease from new wool. Laundresses save it for certain stains and then scold it out as if erasing a rumour. Disgusting, says the modern nose. Effective, says the ledger. The line between those two is usually labour you didn't do. Laundry is public theatre with private stakes. Riverbanks become newsrooms. Bleaching greens become rival newspapers. Clotheslines write a week's plot in tidy rows. Who has money for many shifts? Whose house had a sickbed? Who keeps children neat enough to tempt angels? City ordinances breathe down the scene. No bucking across the common path. No soap rinsing above the fishmongers. No beating cloth at the bridge where gentlemen pass. Fines for those who sling suds into the wrong current. Municipal virtue smells like a clerk who doesn't own shirts. A pinch of satire. Imagine the alderman who bans hedge bleaching because it spoils the view, when the view is exactly what supports his collar. Opposite the laundry yard stands the other pillar of domestic ecology, the chamber pot. The close stool, a chair with a secret, lives by the bed. The bordaloo, boat-shaped and discreet, rides in carriages and pews. Travel pots hide in trunks like contraband decency. They are part furniture, part confession. Etiquette rules are as strict as military codes. Lid on, cloth over, empty early, clean well. Ash and sand scour, vinegar water rinses. A pinch of resin or orris keeps the nose civilized. A maid who handles the pot handles the household's fiction of effortlessness. To pretend the body doesn't inscribe itself on rooms is a luxury someone else's wrists purchase. Where does it all go? Into a world of trades we laugh at until we need them. Privies feed cesspits. Cesspits feed men with ropes and buckets at night. Gong farmers, nightmen. Names that sound like folklore until you read a bill of sale. Lower themselves into the city's memory and bring it back up in pails, carting it to fields where it becomes next year's food, or out beyond the walls where it stops being anyone's problem. At least, that's the plan. In practice, pits leak, drains sulk, rain forgets civility, and someone's second-floor servant gets fed up and tips a slop pail from a window with a shout that might as well be a municipal anthem. Cities pass rules, humans pass liquids. The dance is older than plumbing. Not all houses are equal in their negotiations with waste. A townhouse on a narrow lane makes privacy a performance. A courtyard house makes it an errand. Wealth buys distance, more screens, more servants, commodes that look like cabinets, pots that look like porcelain metaphors. Poverty buys improvisation, a shared yard with a queue at dawn, a pot hidden behind a curtain by the stove, a sprint to the corner at hours when no one's candle is lit. Between them runs the night soilman's cart, equalizing with a shovel what class tries to separate with doors. Hospitals and armies scale everything up until the seam bursts. In a war camp, laundresses double as logisticians of decency, boiling shirts crawling with camp life, scalding bandages for reuse, risking infection long before anyone learns to name germs. Their pay is late and their reputation doubly taxed. Moralists glance at the steam of a wash kettle and see other kinds of heat. In a hospital, washing becomes triage. Linens for fevers here, for surgeries there. Bucking tubs labelled as if they were apothecary jars, because cross-contamination kills even in a miasma age. The first public health is often a laundress with a list. Back in the house, smell remains the referee. The same still room that flavoured gloves make wash waters. Rosemary, marjoram, orange peel. Benzoin, the domestic liturgy of kindness. Floors are strewn with rushes and herbs, not just to cushion footfalls, but to teach rooms to smell like field and forest, rather than kennel and kitchen. Chamber pots washed with vinegar get a last rinse of myrtle. Sheets stored with lavender learn to whisper respectability, even on days when money doesn't. None of this is decadence. It's the handshake one offers a crowded life. You can chart a city's conscience by its water rules. No blood in the brook on market days. No dunking hides above the drawer for the fountain. Privies to be lined, not left to soak. When pipes finally arrive, They don't abolish the old ecology so much as bury it. Laundresses move to steam laundries, night soilmen to sewers, chamber pots to antique shops and comedy. But until that pivot, cleanliness is civic traffic, and women direct it like wardens. Humour belongs here, or everyone would go mad. Imagine a lane where a sudden gust turns a line of sheets into apparitions that chase a magistrate into a puddle. Imagine a dog that steals a still damp chemise and gallops joyous through a churchyard. Imagine the diplomatic tone with which a maid informs a gentleman visitor that his boots should not, under any circumstances, be left near the screen by the bedroom fire. The comedy is never at the expense of bodies. It is about the choreography of too many needs in too little space. If you want the moral, it is unromantic. Clean is a system. It has inputs: water, fuel, cloth, soap, time, and outputs: steam, slop, ash, gossip. It runs on women's labour so constant it becomes invisible, and on men's labour so stigmatized it becomes a joke. It is regulated by people who write rules from rooms that don't know where Monday lives, and mocked by people who inherit clean collars without inventorying the risks that ironed them. You can dislike the smells of the past and still admire the people who managed them with the tools they had. What did the day feel like to someone at the centre of this ecology? Hot forearms, wet hems, the pleasure of a line of towels snapping in a wind that finally points the right way, the satisfaction of a chamber pot that rinses clear on the second pass, the relief when a stain you swore would never lift surrenders in blue light, the small blasphemy of a back stretched straight after the last iron goes back on the trivet. Clean is less a virtue than a victory, won, not assumed. We are almost ready to leave the rooms and lanes, to walk back to portraits knowing where their whites were washed and how their air was edited. One chapter remains, the place where we drop the punchlines and keep the tools, weigh disgust against context, and tell the truth simple enough to remember. That most people tried, most days, to be tolerable to each other. The past does not smell like a candle aisle, neither does the present without plumbing. In the conclusion, we'll collect the ledger. What helped, what hurt, what lasted, and what our jokes say about us more than they ever said about them. What the past really smells like. A clear-eyed conclusion. Stand in the doorway of everything we've seen. A still room ticking softly. A hedge bright with linen. A dressing table set like a tiny apothecary. A wash copper panting in the yard. A chamber pot waiting to be made respectable again. The old rumour says the past stank and women made it worse. The record we've walked through says the opposite. Most people, most days, tried to be tolerable to each other with the tools and theories they had, and women built the operating system that made that possible. 3 truths survive the tour. First, clean is a system, not a virtue. It has inputs: water, fuel, cloth, time, belief, and outputs: steam, slops, ash, rules, gossip. Change any one variable and the system reconfigures. Scarce hot water? Linen becomes a daily bath. Malodorous industries in every quarter. Scent becomes a treaty rather than a luxury. Plumbing arrives. Soap migrates from laundry to skin, and daily shower becomes a moral sentence instead of an engineering miracle. When we judge, we should price the fuel and count the buckets. Second, disgust is not data. Satire is sticky, logistics are slow. The pamphlet that laughs at a powdered head outlives the ledger that lists combs and vinegar. The cartoon of a queen who never bathed goes viral. The household book that schedules face, feet, and linens is filed under boring. We've met the real routine. Ceruse that signalled order, even as it risked harm. Oils and powders that disciplined hair and fought vermin. Gritty tooth powders that bought a smile at the cost of enamel. Belts and cloth that kept dignity on a calendar. Baths used like prescriptions in a world that suspected water. Laundresses and nightmen who translated other people's cleanliness into their own aching backs. The joke keeps the vermin. The sauces keep the comb. Third, what lasts is dose. Institutions, neighbours. Dose. The ancient, stubborn truth that too much and too little can both ruin. Lead made faces legible across candlelit rooms, and sick. Pumice polished and erased. Scent edited the world and made it easy to sneer at other people's smells. Institutions, guilds, ordinances, bathhouses, turn stoves, monastic rules, spa schedules, the city's evolving nose mapped into law. Neighbours, the practical piece that lets wash hang on the green without turning into scandal. The social choreography that keeps a bucket discreet and a hedge useful. The shared understanding that we all have bodies, and most days we are trying. If there is a villain here, it isn't dirt. It's the hierarchy that assigns both disgust and labour. Women's bodies were turned into billboards for moral anxiety, even as women's hands ran the boilers, wrung the linen, perfumed the gloves, stitched the pads, cooled fevers, and cleaned the pots. The people who wrote rules against public washing wore collars that crackled with someone else's Monday. Even the chemistry cooperated with inequality. Elites could buy sugar and lose teeth sooner. They could buy lead and pass for porcelain. They could buy scent and rename the tannery. Meanwhile, the laundress pioneered public health without a textbook, and the midwife invented quiet hydraulics with a kettle and a towel. We should also admit where their system bit back. Lead whitened and damaged. Abrasives scoured and thinned. Strong plant law flirted with danger. Miasma theory mistook breeze for plague. But error isn't filth. It is belief under pressure, trying to make life workable. Our age has its own jars and jokes, filters and fluorides and wellness potions, algorithmic myths about other people's bodies. We police smells with products and policy. We outsource labour we prefer not to see. If the past deserves context, so does the present. So, what does the past actually smell like when you stop shouting "ew" and open the door? Like bread and smoke from the hearth. Leather trying to forget its animal. Linen and lye having an argument we now call Monday. Rosewater, vinegar, and orange peel editing a crowded street. Powder and oil teaching hair to behave. Myrrh and clove pretending mint had already been invented. Sometimes night soil and river, because cities are honest when it rains. Not a cartoon cloud, not a candle aisle, an ecology. And what did clean feel like in that ecology? Like discipline you could touch, a cool shift at noon, a glove that didn't betray its factory, hair that held through weather and sermons, a mouth that announced nothing, a pad changed on time, a bath that felt like a negotiated truce. Clean was not innocence, it was logistics. It was someone keeping track. If you carry anything forward from this, let it be generous reading. The past wasn't a perfume ad or a dung heap. It was a set of solutions to heat, work, crowding, and fear. Some harsh, some ingenious, many maintained by women whose names never made it into the books that mocked them. When we meet an old recipe or a portrait or a list of laundry finds, we can either sneer or translate. Translation is harder. It's also truer. So the next time a meme promises the disgusting hygiene habits of women in history, you know where to look. In drawers and closets, on hedges and greens, at washstands and still rooms, where the work happened. Ask what smelled, what helped, what hurt, and who paid. Laugh when the sheets attack the magistrate. Humour is allowed, but let the ledgers win the last word. Thank you for walking the long way with me, from pomanders to chamber pots, from powdered wigs to blued linens. If this journey made your present feel a little less obvious, and the past a little less gross, then the work did what it was meant to do. That's our episode. If you enjoyed it, you know the drill. Like, subscribe, and tell us the city you're watching from. See you next time.